Marvellous. Yep, we'll start. Good morning, everybody. We might just get started this morning so that we are running day 3 on time. We've done very well for the past 2 days, so we will continue in that vein. Welcome, everybody, to day 3. And as part of the preliminary opening remarks, we do have a couple of things to do. We do have an announcement this morning as well. As some housekeeping and then a few reflections as we did yesterday. So what I would like to start off with is an acknowledgement of country. And as we have done each day this week, I would like to acknowledge that I am presently a guest on the lands of the Jagera and the Turrbal people, that we are presently in Mianjin. And we are paying our respects to those who were custodians and stewards of this land forever. And also to pay our respects to any First Nations people who are here today, and to express our great thanks for the generosity of First Nations people as they contribute towards the enterprise of education in this country. Now, I was also thinking about this because whilst there is, and this is something for our international guests as well, is that whilst there are some agreed upon ways in which you can do an acknowledgement of country, everyone will encourage you to make sure that you think about this so that you can actually have a personal reflection and that you can actually contribute something from the heart, as it were. And so my contribution this morning, when I was thinking about this, and we use the word custodian very much, that First Nations people have been the custodians of these lands and waterways, and thinking about what that actually means and why this is actually really important for open educators. A custodian doesn't own what they look after. A custodian is there to make sure that they preserve, maintain and enhance what is under their stewardship so that future generations can enjoy it. Now, if we were to look at ourselves as custodians in education, we've taken it upon ourselves to maintain, preserve and enhance knowledge for future generations, people we are likely to never meet. One of the words as well that definitely comes into the parlance of librarians is that of curation. And it's an interesting word because originally a curate was an ecclesiastic title, and it comes from the Latin curare, which means the care of the soul. And I think that if you look at the sum total of human knowledge, that we are the only species who asks questions, who are driven by that curiosity, that thirst for knowledge, to answer questions and then to pass that knowledge down to future generations. If there ever was a soul to humanity, I think it is that common wealth of knowledge. And so if you are curating, if you are a custodian, this is definitely tied to open education. I did work with a colleague many years ago, Ken Udas, and Ken provided me with what I think is probably the best description of a higher education institution I have ever heard. And he said that universities are repositories of social hope. Let that sit with you for a moment. And it's really easy to lose that in the day-to-day grind that we have documentation, we have restructures, we have all sorts of things, a pressure to publish, we have a whole range of things that push down on us. But what is great about this conference, and what I have heard already from people, is that it provides us with a very small amount of opportunity to sit, to think, and to contribute to the repository of social hope. Now, under stewardship as well, this is very important because I would hope that Carmel, Anna, Sarah, and I have been good stewards of OEGlobal, and that we have looked after, we have maintained, we have preserved, we have enhanced, and we are passing it on to the future. And with that, I will pass over to Igor and Marcella because we have an announcement for this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3. We hope that you have really enjoyed the past 2 days, and please stay on for the third day because the program is fully packed, including a workshop done by Adrian. So good morning, everyone. Couple of announcements regarding 2025 and 2026 in terms of our, good morning, Penny, regarding our events and conferences. So in 2025, we are exploring possibilities for spotlighting, highlighting, and catalyzing open education-related developments in different regions of the world. Currently, we are exploring and considering many possibilities to this end, and of course, we will want to co-create this value together with our members and the community at large. So stay tuned for more information. Now, we also have another announcement concerning 2026. So I would like to now ask our AVIT support team to please play a video.
Open education here means open resources in and outside of the classroom for our students.
We're inventing a more open future for all curious minds by sharing a treasure of knowledge for you to discover anywhere, anytime.
We're rethinking open by recognizing voices and expertise from people of diverse backgrounds are absolutely necessary for expanding and growing open educational resources.
20% of our faculty have adapted, adopted, and/or created OER.
We are inventing a more open future for all consumers and producers of knowledge by leading in the development of sustainable open publishing models and open source publishing technologies.
We are relentless in our pursuit of a more open and equitable scholarly landscape.
Open is democratizing learning and knowledge to the world.
Nous avons créé une fondation pour yon deme meilleur côté c'est identité apprenant yo capé den fil les outils pour éducation sans barrière.
Here, open is in our DNA.
It captures our commitment to sharing our best educational contributions in a way that everyone can build on them and make them even better.
Here, openness is a core value. We share information, innovations, and ideas with enthusiasm. We champion open courseware, open access, and open science, all crucial to our mission. Our doors are open too, so come join us.
Come join us.
Come join us.
Come invent with us.
Come invent with us.
We can't wait to welcome you.
I think you would enjoy seeing Cambridge, and I certainly look forward to meeting you. So let's do it.
Good morning. Yeah. MIT OpenCourseware and the Massachusetts Department of Education OER Advisory Committee are honored to co-host the OEGlobal 2026 conference in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm Kurt Newton, Director of MIT OpenCourseware. 2026 will mark the 18th anniversary of this great consortium, which we now know as OEGlobal. 2026 is also the 25th anniversary of MIT OpenCourseware. With the many OER advocates, practitioners, doers, and thought leaders across our region and around the world, we invite you to gather and reflect as a global community on the campus of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I want to acknowledge the indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land on which we will gather and pay respect to the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which the MIT campus sits is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory and that of so many other Native nations. MIT and the University of Massachusetts Amherst are among many dozens of land-grant universities in the United States that were supported by the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862, through which nearly 11 million acres of land from over 82 Native nations were seized and sold to settlers to finance the founding and the building of these schools. So we honor and we respect the many diverse indigenous people connected from time immemorial to these lands. And we commit to strengthening relationships with the indigenous community and the leaders of these indigenous nations. At MIT, and for me personally, we are committed and beginning to do this essential work. Over the past 2 decades, the OER community has grown in size, expanded its perspectives, and delivered life-changing impacts. At MIT OpenCourseware, we can't help but be inspired by all of this mission-driven innovation which you've been contributing. In our local community, our co-hosts, the Massachusetts Department of Education Statewide OER Advisory Council, represents OER efforts from 29 public institutions in our state. One recent highlight of their work I'd like to share with you now has been the Remixing Open Textbooks Through an Equity Lens, or ROTEL program. Grants provided and now implemented across 6 public universities in Massachusetts and leading to 20 new OER textbooks so far. And also highlight how open education is residing in this broader context of the evolving open ecosystem. Practices that span culture, research, data, and tools, all things the world needs to have more open, right? At MIT, our open education work is resonant with programs like new open publishing models led by the MIT Press and our MIT libraries advancing open access policies and practices in powerful new ways. So it's clear that our cycles of ideation and invention never quit. While we celebrate what we've achieved, we are not satisfied. There's so much more to do, more opportunities to unlock, and more futures to liberate. We'll keep imagining and inventing together toward this more open and equitable future. So I'd like to close with a few recognitions and appreciations. First, 2 colleagues on our 2026 Planning Committee are here with us from MIT Open Learning, Shira Siegel and Brandon Muramatsu. Also from our Planning Committee, in absentia physically, but fully with us in spirit, I'd like to mention from the Massachusetts OER Advisory Council, Marilyn Billings, Bob Awkward, Marilyn Gonzalez, and Sue Tashian, and our OCW colleague also, Sarah Hansen, who might be watching all of us on the live stream. Hello. And especially a hearty thank you to OEGlobal and this year's hosts, University of Southern Queensland, the State Library of Queensland, and Queensland University of Technology. Special thanks to our hard-working planning committee here, Adrian Stagg from the University of Southern Queensland, Sarah Howard, Associate Director of the Library at Queensland University of Technology, Anna Ronick, Executive Director of Content at the State Library of Queensland, and Carmel O'Sullivan, University Librarian at University of Southern Queensland. If you'd please come to the stage, we'd like to, express our appreciation and grant you some tokens of appreciation. These are chocolates from our favorite chocolatier in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They happen to be little chocolate penguins. I heard on the news that an emperor penguin showed up on the southern beaches of Australia recently, and so I was thinking of that adventurous penguin in this spirit. And, this committee has done such a wonderful job organizing this outstanding conference. I think we'll all agree that we have big shoes to fill for the 2026 conference, and know that we will work very hard to live up to the example that you've set for us. And finally, thank you to the OEGlobal board for entrusting us to host this conference in 2026, with special thanks to Igor, Marcella, and the president and the vice president of the board, Perrine and Connie, for shepherding us through the process. If you'd like to join us up here on stage briefly. And thanks to all of you for the work that we have been doing and continue to do. So, come invent with us. See you all in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 2026. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Should I say? Yes. So thank you very, very much to welcome us to host the next conference in 26. I'm not only honored to go back to the origin of OpenCourseware, but sometimes we can be not satisfied, which is good, because we will do better and better, but you must know that your impact has grown beyond anything you can imagine. Because if I am here today, it's because one day I arrived in higher education and I was hired because of you, because some new jobs were created within the public service in France. So I must thank you all to have permitted that I'm here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think come invent with us is certainly a challenge and also a provocation for us to already start thinking about what kinds of presentations are we going to take with us to MIT. Now, just a couple of quick things before we start our keynote this morning. So a reminder, obviously, that we have got plenty of people contributing towards social platforms. Please do continue with your pictures for today. And also, we have a survey about your experience here. And very, very fortunately, we have copies of the Equity in Higher Education book, which has only just come out, that our keynote for this morning, Penny, has donated. So if you would not only like a copy, but a signed copy, I would encourage you to fill in the survey, and we'll have that available during this morning. Also, I would say that for this afternoon, the last session is going to be the panel from 4 till 5 in this room here, and there are plenty of opportunities for you to add questions over at OEG Connect. So I would encourage you to do so, because you'll not only have all of the keynotes present, but also we've invited our partner institution, GoGN. They will have a member of the panel as well. So, in the interest of keeping to time, I'm going to pass over directly to Carmel, who will introduce our keynote for day 3. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adrian, and congratulations to the 2026 conference hosts. It's been an amazing experience for us, and we really wish you all the best for 2026. It is my great pleasure to introduce our final keynote, Professor Penny Jane Burke. And Penny's going to take us through a journey about her experiences and research. And I would like to start by looking through the kinds of professional achievements that Penny has brought with her. So Penny is the UNESCO Chair in Equity and Social Justice and Higher Education. She's Director of the Centre of Excellence for Equity in Higher Education at the University of Newcastle, Australia. She's the Honorary Global Chair of Social Innovation at the University of Bath, an Honorary Professor at the University of Exeter. She's developed pedagogical methodologies to generate transformative change. She's generated, the academics in the room will be very jealous to hear that she's generated over $4 million in research funding. She has over 2,100 citations. She's written multiple books, not just the one that we are hopefully going to, two of us are going to win because we fill in the survey today. She's a member of the Australian Equity in Higher Education panel, tasked by the federal government with creating a 5-year roadmap for equity in higher education. So I think those are amazing credentials for our final keynote speaker of the conference. We are really, really happy to have Penny Jane Burke here to share her thoughts with us.
Thank you so much, Carmel, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you, everybody, for being here this morning for my keynote. It's a real joy and a great honor to be with you all this morning on this last day of what has been such a thought-provoking conference, creating time, space, and resources to think critically together with the intention to do education openly. I'm new to this community of open education, although everything about it resonates deeply with my commitments, values, and work. So it's wonderful and also deeply heartening to join your conversations. I'd like to thank you for your warmth in welcoming me into your community, and especially a special thanks to Adrienne, Sarah, Anna, and Carmel for extending the invitation to participate as a keynote speaker. And I really do hope that there will be resonances with your work throughout my keynote this morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the unceded land we meet upon today and pay my deepest respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and to all First Nations people here today. I'd also like to acknowledge the unceded land of the Awabakal and Worimi people, where I'm very privileged to live, work, and play, and I'd like to recognize how that land fills me with the love, courage, and inspiration to engage in the struggle for social justice in, through, and beyond higher education, sometimes not an easy task. First Nations knowledges and values are central to mobilizing higher education for social justice transformation, and it is this that I will be speaking about today. So just a quick overview. So I'm going to first of all start by exploring my own socio-personal histories through the idea of the autobiography of the question, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. I want to provoke our imaginations through critical questioning, and then turn to a multidimensional social justice reimaginary of higher education through praxis. And I want to then open time for social justice praxis by offering you a case study, the Gender Justice Hub, which focuses on the social epidemic of gender-based violence. So let me start with the autobiography of the question. And I first came across this concept of the autobiography of the question in 1995 when I was a master's student at the Institute of Education, University of London. My inspirational tutor, Jane Miller, developed this compelling concept as a resource to open space for her students to bring the stories of the questions they were asking and of the literatures and theories they were engaging with, sometimes with a sense of overwhelm. Jane knew that teachers brought a wealth of experience and knowledge to the master's space, but she also recognized that they often found the conventions of academic writing intimidating. Jane introduced the autobiography of the question as a methodology to bring themselves into the research process. This captured my imagination, and I have used the autobiography of the question ever since as a pedagogical tool in my own work to open space for participants to explore the histories, values, and assumptions they bring to the questions they're exploring in relation to wider histories more capacious than their own. This expands processes of personal exploration and critical reflexivity, always situating oneself in wider debates, literatures, and ideas. So I'm going to start by sharing my autobiography of the question in relation to the keynote that I offer to you today. 35 years ago, I fled an intensely violent relationship in life or death circumstances with my baby son. We had been prisoners of the house for many years. I managed to escape, a story for another day, but at the age of only 21, I was now homeless and dislocated. I lost everything I owned, but I had my baby, and he filled me with the will to transform our life circumstances. In England, I received the care of a welfare state that provided me refuge, health care, legal aid, staff who helped me navigate an unwieldy social services system, social housing, and finally, an open access to higher education program that was truly transformative. There, I discovered my lifelong love of sociology, which gave me a language to articulate my experiences of gender-based violence and to express my passionate commitment to social justice transformation. I had by now formed a reconstituted family with a new loving, supportive, and caring partner. Through a friend, I discovered the Access to Higher Education program, and I can still feel the sense of pure joy and excitement after attending an open evening. I was thrilled by the opportunities this presented to me. I participated on the Access program while pregnant with my second son and while caring for my stepson and my baby, who was by now 3 years old, and at the college nursery with me while I poured myself into full-time study. I didn't make a choice, but I went to the local polytechnic where I met many other mature women students who had accessed higher education against the odds, many like me who had experienced gender-based violence. My peers filled me with a new determination to advocate for women's access to higher education. I was so fortunate that at this time, in the early 1990s in England, I had access to free higher education. Just think, today, higher education costs fees of just under £10,000 per year. That's without the cost of living on top of it. So I had access to free higher education, subsidized childcare, and access to a comprehensive library where I spent hours studying while my children were at school. I also experienced the power of recognition through generous mentors who believed in me and encouraged me to keep going with my academic journey, even though I had no idea of my direction. And so I ended up taking a master's degree and then being able to secure a Research Council-funded PhD. I was driven by the project to passionately advocate for continued open access to higher education, and I threw myself into many different projects. I developed a return to study program. I moderated countless access programs across the Greater London area, and I learned so much from that. I also worked with the Open University, an incredibly transformative experience as well. And I worked in participatory and collaborative ways to understand the different challenges students faced whilst also navigating complex inequalities. Through this, I came to understand that despite redistribution and recognition, the trauma and shame associated with lived experiences of profound injustices is not simply a barrier that a person overcomes. It is a persistent structure of feeling that creates the conditions of a sense of not belonging and unworthiness through entrenched forms of institutionalized misrecognition. I write about this in an autobiographical essay in the forthcoming book I'm really honored to be part of, Women of a Certain Courage. This is what I write. Knowledge-making became accessible in new and exciting ways through the suggestion of a friend who read my honors dissertation and encouraged me to undertake a postgraduate degree. His recognition that my research was important totally shifted my self-perception. Recognition felt so different from shame. New avenues were open to me. Yet the shame of trauma was so insidious that I could only walk a narrow path, the one where I believed I could make a difference to other women or to my family, but I still did not believe in me. I was continuously in a state of displacement, of unbelonging, of self-disorientation. Yet through the language of feminist, decolonial, anti-racist praxis, and over many years of dedicated research, I developed an authorial voice of my own, and I found the courage to speak and write about the injustice of gendered status subordination in Nancy Fraser's terms, or misrecognition, and its manifestation in shame as a form of symbolic violence, a social emotion emanating from the institutionalized and unequal cultural value order that perpetuates the pathologizing of identities and practices associated with femininities and other intersecting systems of injustice, oppression, and marginalization. I'm going to take up these themes of redistribution, recognition, trauma, and shame throughout my keynote. So I want to start by provoking our imaginations through critical questioning. What is the role of higher education in being and doing open? In our book, Equity in Higher Education, Time for Social Justice Praxis, Matt Lumb and I weave together differently colored and shaped social justice theories to interrogate whose values, knowledges, and practices are foregrounded in dynamic geopolitical historical timescapes of higher education. We reject the Tina effect, the idea that there is no alternative. There are always possibilities for different ways of being, thinking, doing against the hegemonic order of which neoliberalism and its intersection with other forces of injustice have profoundly reframed the purpose of higher education through privileging economic, corporate, commercialized, and marketized views, and simultaneously asserting these as objective, universal, and value-free. The hegemonic discourse that higher education is primarily about building human capital to strengthen national economies opens and obviously limits particular regimes of truth in Foucauldian terms that profoundly shape contemporary discourses of equity. Hegemonic framings of equity conceal multidimensional injustices through a digestible, sanitized, and neutralized language. For example, we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. We even shorthand this as EDI or DEI, depending on where you are in the world. For example, we talk about this in largely quantified and instrumentalized terms of data collection, intervention, measurement of impact, while largely ignoring the relationship between inequities and the multidimensional, multiscalar, socio-ecological crises facing our human and more than human communities. This is in a context in which most nation-states fail to provide comprehensive public funding for higher education, putting pressure on institutions and individuals to focus on income generation rather than education. Simply put, higher education has become a corporate business. This has placed increasing pressure on individual students to take on substantial levels of student debt in contexts in which some students already face profound forms of financial hardship, while also pressurizing individual teachers to be equitable in contexts of intensified and accelerated workloads with less resources and within a corporate performative culture concealed by discourses of excellence and the recognition of only individualized forms of success. This helps to reinforce cultures of hyper-individual competitiveness, making it challenging to collaborate, and most especially to collaborate with communities and people who are deemed as outside of the excellence agenda and are navigating multidimensional inequities. All of this works towards the perverse outcome of widening inequalities and inequities, even while we are tasked with building equity. So how does this misframing of higher education and equity relate to struggles over the right to knowledge, knowing, and learning? Well, higher education is never neutral or separate from complex social relations of power. Higher education and the bodies of people and knowledge positioned within it are immersed in complex power dynamics. All of us are, every day in which we take up practices. So in this way, higher education plays a central role in producing and legitimating knowledge and who is recognized as knowing and who is not. These politics of knowledge and knowing have extensive implications in and also beyond higher education, in mobilizing the interests of pernicious forces, including anti-intellectualism, the devaluing of arts, humanities, and social sciences, plutocracies, and post-truth populisms. Misrecognition, which is the unequal cultural value orders that subjugate bodies of people and knowledge associated with equity policy discourse, is put to work in ways that impact claims to personhood, status, and knowing. Decades of critical, anti-colonial, anti-racist, and feminist work has illuminated the manipulative strategies used to other, negate, pathologize, misrecognize, and dehumanize. These bodies of work provide rich insights to deepen our understanding of equity, and yet these bodies of work are largely marginalized in the hegemonic order of equity and corporatized higher education. The co-option of equity, diversity, and inclusion through populist, corporate, neoliberal misframings dehistoricized, decontextualizes, and depoliticizes what are struggles over status, value, authority, and personhood, as well as access to resources, opportunities, and privileges, all of which are afforded through university access and participation, albeit in a highly inequitable, hierarchical, and stratified system. So, what are the implications of different articulations of openness for higher education's capacity to contribute to social justice transformation, and what constitutes, limits, and enables this? Well, this is a big question that I don't have time to fully respond to, but is part of the sustained arguments that Matt and I make in our book, including the concern that within contemporary hegemonic frameworks, there is an openness to sustaining what we call ignorance to the complex forces of injustice that are entrenched in higher education and that distort equity in the interest of privileged positionalities. Australia's current Universities Accord process sets the framework for the future of higher education, and it has many important dimensions. I don't want to erase those from view. Most importantly, foregrounding First Nations knowledges, which is incredibly important and fantastic, but simultaneously undermines rigorous equity work through the example of introducing the language of fee-free preparation courses in the context of equity for skills, potentially undermining decades-long enabling programs committed to open access for all, to high-quality, curriculum-rich educational programs of lifelong learning, providing transformative opportunities. So this kind of reduction of this idea that these are just preparation to acquire the skills to get through higher education and be successful in those kind of reductive ways, does not understand or engage with the depth and richness of the enabling education movement in Australia. Further, we are increasingly open to methodologies that are dehumanizing, decontextualizing datafication systems in which only that which is measurable is seen to count. In such methodological frameworks, epistemological and ontological considerations are skipped with a leap to methods of data collection, with little attention of who participates in the design of research and evaluation, whose values are privileged in the process, and who is in an authoritative position to bring those values to play in processes of interpreting and analyzing data, further popularizing reductive what works agendas for peripheral forms of equity. Indeed, who determines what equity is and who is subjected to the gaze of equity interventions and policies, and how these interventions and policies produce knowledge, knowing, and evidence about equity, and those constructed through equity classifications, seems to be far from open to debate. And this is inevitably harmful to those misrepresented and marginalized from parity of participation in the project of higher education development and the imagining of what higher education is for. We suggest that these hegemonic framings of equity generate what we call deficit imaginaries. So why do we use this word or this concept of deficit imaginaries? We want to emphasize that deficit is entrenched in the way that the problem of equity is being constructed in higher education, shaping the kinds of questions we ask and the kinds of policies and practices that we take up. Deficit imaginaries are powerful in concealing the more insidious inequities and traumas that are formed from everyday lived experiences of marginalization, even while simultaneously institutions claim a commitment to equity, and this is a form of institutionalized gaslighting. Deficit imaginaries place equity as outside of core educational practices. We call this the peripherization of equity, putting equity at the peripheries of institutions, and then projecting equity onto the bodies of those constructed through the stigmatizing lens of disadvantage and equity classifications. Equity interventions are designed to correct the perceived deficiencies of individuals constructed through homogenizing categorization. So, for example, in Australia, the idea of low socioeconomic status, rather than looking at the social and economic injustices that create the conditions for differently positioned people to experience educational disadvantage and denial of access to quality resources. So these processes are around diagnosing those who are attached to those categorizations as lacking certain attributes which are loaded with value while constructed as objective and measurable. So, for example, aspiration, the idea that the problem is lack of aspiration, potential, who's seen to have it and who isn't, and how that's loaded with value judgments is not unpacked. Notions of capability, lack of resilience, lack of confidence, and so on and so forth. Inclusion is a process by which individuals associated with equity classifications are provided remediation to fit into the hegemonic system and or the hegemonic way of being or doing. So to be recognized as having potential, a person must conform to the practices or ways of being that enable that recognition of potential in particular discipline or professional contexts. Deficit imaginaries are forms of symbolic violence that do harm to the soul and spirit, reproducing insidious traumas that are rooted in multidimensional injustices. As one senior academic that we interviewed in another project that I don't have time to talk about today, but I want to bring her words in because I think it's very poignant. She says her experience of being a senior women academic in STEM is a death by 1,000 cuts. In this way, deficit imaginaries ensure that we are caught in a vicious circle of perpetuating the very inequities that we are seeking to remedy. So in our book, we weave together a rich tapestry of social justice praxis emerging from feminist, anti-racist, anti-colonial, and critical concepts, pedagogies, and theories to offer a new multidimensional reframing of equity. This rich tapestry threads through the work of Nancy Fraser to understand that each dimension of injustice is intersecting and relational, working towards holding the dimensions of redistribution, recognition, and representation together, and in conversation with social justice praxis, provides conceptual and practical resources to think with and make with differently. We offer our work as opening critical time, critical space, and resources to, in Donna Haraway's words, stay with the trouble of social justice praxis, the dialogical and ongoing process of reflection, action, action, reflection, so that there is no final remedy, but only an invitation to be open to the complexities that our more than human relational being in and with the world poses to us. An overarching aim is to recognize that we are all interdependent and interconnected in relation to flourishing and well-being. And in this way, open education is never an individual or private matter, but always oriented towards an ethics of care beyond ourselves. So in the book, and with these kinds of commitments in mind, and within this rich tapestry of thinking with and doing with others, which I don't have time to unpack, unfortunately, in this keynote today, we offer a meta-methodological framework, which we call POEMS, which commits to the following aspects. So POEMS is praxis-based, the deep dialogic time-space resources that are necessary for critical and collective action and reflection. Pedagogical, in that we are trying to open space of learning, thinking, and making with through ongoing commitment to collaboration and participation. So everything we do is pedagogical. And I know that that's the ethos of open education, but often we, in higher education, we only see different sort of formal moments as pedagogical. And we don't really see research as pedagogical. So this is a rethinking of methodology as pedagogical. Ethically oriented, exercising an ethics of care and a deep responsibility within relational orientations to thinking, being, and doing. And methodologies that are rigorous in relation to multidimensional social justice praxis and that avoid decontextualization and dehumanizing methods of data collection and analysis with an explicit commitment to ethical reflexivity in processes of knowledge and policy formation. Now, this is not against quantitative methods in any sense, but it's about making sure that the way that we approach work has an ethics of care in the way that we work with marginalized communities who have been outside of the terms of participation in developing strategies for higher education and higher education equity. And of course, this is all about supporting co-participants to thrive through communities of praxis. So I'll just say a little bit about this idea of communities of praxis. So this idea is distinct from communities of practice. It builds on communities of practice because communities of practice are incredibly rich, important sites in which we have shared identities and we come together in the way we are now to nurture our sense of direction and our sense of contribution. So it's not to discount the importance of communities of practice, but to build on and expand this idea. And so in communities of praxis, we come together to engage in interrogating those shared values, identities, and assumptions to resist the reproduction of unequal cultural value orders that can have exclusive effects. So, for example, the ways in which we recognize potential within a particular professional community of practice, which can be exclusive to other bodies of people with different experiences. Or, for example, the ways in which we frame what success looks like. So really unpacking those taken for granted assumptions and practices that make judgments about these important attributes around inclusion. And the communities of praxis strive towards sensitized and trauma-informed awareness of power relations that are otherwise invisible in key processes. So those processes might be, for example, processes of recruitment, admissions, assessment, decision-making, judgments, curriculum and pedagogical development, promotion, and so on. And members of the community of praxis commit to interrogating the taken for granted practices and assumptions that are exclusive or judgmental to others. And transformation through inclusive practices are grounded in mutual care, reciprocity, and collaboration to challenge toxic, hyper-individualistic competitiveness. And the aim is to build on our communities of praxis by engaging in ethical reflexivity, generating collective agency for social justice praxis to become possible, because we can't make this change alone. No one person can be tasked with equity and then expect institutional change to happen. We have to work together. It is only through collective agency that we can unpack some of those taken for granted practices that are exclusive and then find the strategies for transformation and change. So CEHE has developed a suite of community and student-centered programs. CEHE stands for the Center of Excellence for Equity in Higher Education, and is where the UNESCO chair is based. So these are interconnected through what we call a relational navigator framework. This draws from Freirean forms of pedagogical praxis in which unequal power relations are redressed, while reciprocal iterative processes of critical reflection action are sustained. So an ethics of care is central to the ethos of the relational navigator framework, in which caring for, caring about, and caring with is foregrounded. The relational navigator accompanies students in the context of their lives as a partner navigating unwieldy and fragmented domains of social community and student services, and as an advocate for the student and the wider students' community. However, the student is positioned as the primary navigator in this power dynamic, whilst having the support and care of the relational navigator team to ensure that the resources and supports available are accessible and appropriate. There's ongoing and proactive co-advocacy to raise awareness of gaps in services and the implications of these for absences, for the well-being and flourishing of those affected by maldistribution, misrecognition, misrepresentation. And this is further strengthened by a foundation of community partnership working together to trouble problematic assumptions around who is seen as having the right to higher education and who is not, and to unsettle deficit imaginaries that produce stigmatization and misrecognition. And we also produce this open access journal in which we think together about writing and publication as an issue of equity. So questions in relation to writing are critical to the politics of knowledge and knowing and who has access to this, as you all know very well, and this is the work you're engaged in all the time. This includes questions of authorship, authority, and who claims a position as knower, and what claims are made on behalf of whom, and how this is connected to the politics of representation and misrepresentation. Such questions are related to the peripherization of equity and of equity in educational practitioners themselves, who are often positioned outside of knowledge production processes. This misrecognizes the important knowledge that practitioners bring, and so opening spaces for their writing is so important. CHE has facilitated programs to open time, space, and resources to engage practitioners and students in writing together and questioning how and why we write and how equity is central to these questions. Our journal, Access Critical Explorations of Equity in Higher Education, is a collaboration with Anglia Ruskin University in the UK and is an inclusive and pedagogical space for writing differently, foregrounding writing as a creative process. Okay, so now I want to just leap into sharing with you a case study, which is the Gender Justice Hub, which has emerged from collaborative work and also research. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the research in just a moment. So the top photo is a photo of the team, including Julia Kofi, Stephanie Hardacre, Jean Parker, Felicity Coxoli, Julia Shaw, and Adriana Harrow, Ryle Gordon, Matt Lumb, who are not pictured, Gifty Jayamera, who's in the middle, and Ernestina Nyamba, who's not in the photo. And in the bottom picture is the most recent, in fact, last week, community of praxis in Ghana, our UNESCO Chair Ghana partners who come together to think about questions of gender, gender inequities, and also how that relates to gender-based violence. And the vision of the Gender Justice Hub is to build knowledge, capacity, expertise, and skills to activate higher education's crucial contribution to long-term cultural transformation for gender justice and eradicating gender-based violence. So I'll just give you a quick, because not everybody's familiar with the social epidemic of gender-based violence, which is part of the problem. It's an invisible aspect of higher education concerns around equity, and yet 1 in 3 women globally experience gender-based violence in their lifetime. Gender-based violence is rooted in and sustains gender injustice. It has devastating effects on health and well-being, and this is well documented. But there's very, very little work that looks at the detrimental effects of gender-based violence on education, and that's what we're trying to look at here. 753 million ever-married women have been subjected to physical and or sexual violence at least once since the age of 15, according to the World Health Organization. And there's been a shocking rise in femicide, with 1 woman killed every 4 days in Australia. Of course, this is much worse in different parts of the world as well. And if we ignore gender injustice, we have no chance of eradicating gender-based violence. And if we ignore gender-based violence, we have no chance of achieving gender equality. The Australian government has this year launched a campaign to end gender-based violence in 1 generation. And it is our position that higher education has a crucial role to play in these national plans. Gender-based violence is on a continuum of violence. So the more insidious everyday forms enable more extreme acts of rape, domestic violence, and femicide. It encompasses a whole range of different forms of violence that I have on this slide. As I said, we really haven't looked. There's been some very small studies internationally. There's been nothing that has looked at the question of access to and participation in higher education and lifelong learning in relation to the impact of gender-based violence. So we've conducted research with 430 student participants who have taken part in a comprehensive questionnaire. And this includes quantitative and qualitative data to map out the different forms of violence experienced over the life course and its impact on access to and participation in higher education. We've also followed up with in-depth interviews with 48 student victim survivors about this. And some key findings are that on average, student victim survivors first experience gender-based violence at the age of 13. I just want to say there is a body of work internationally that is looking at gender-based violence from the point of view of sexual violence on campus. But what is ignored is these wider experiences of gender-based violence over a lifetime, and that's what we want to bring attention to. The most incredible thing that has come out of this work is the high value that student victim survivors place on higher education, not just because they see this as transformation for themselves, but because they so want to make a difference to others, and especially to other victim survivors, and to addressing gender inequities, and also to building the strategies to end gender-based violence. The other really important thing is that while they have a high sense of being a student, their identity as being a student, they have a very low sense of belonging, and this is significant statistically in our analysis. So here are just a collection of some extracts from what the students' accounts are across the whole of the 430 accounts, just to give you a flavor of the impact of GBV on educational flourishing. So one student says, please excuse our attendance rates for compulsory tutorials. We are so often going through wars at home that no one knows about. Attendance in the middle of one of those wars could mean additional violence for us, as well as a waste of time in class, because we can't concentrate anyway. Violence right before exams made me unable to participate in them due to distress. I failed courses and I never would have otherwise. I have countless withdrawals due to being unable to cope. And this is one of the patterns we were seeing. A lot of delay, about 35% of the victim survivors had considered dropping out of university completely. My partner made it impossible for me to study by behaving in a violent and controlling way. This prevented me from being able to meet assessment deadlines. I felt extremely afraid and isolated and was not able to access student support. I was deeply afraid that my partner would find the letters or emails and become violent. This resulted in huge HECS debt, and this shows how maldistribution and misrecognition are so tied up. After I experienced domestic violence, I was homeless, living in my car, and I did my first ever final exams at university the day after sleeping in my car. We also have developed rich collaborations with community sector agencies, domestic, family, and sexual violence agencies. And during the periods that we were doing this research, 8 out of 10 women were being turned away for refuge because there just weren't enough beds in the local area. So that this gives you a kind of sense of the problem. We also, it was interesting, and this has also kind of reinforced my own experiences, but as we were analyzing the data, this theme of shame kept coming up. It's a lot of shame was one of the words of one of the interviewees, but many of the student victim survivors talked about this feeling of shame. So we think about this as insidious trauma, doing violence to the soul and spirit, and these words are quite poignant. Gender-based violence makes you feel small and stupid. Certain experiences made my self-esteem get right down, and it sort of made me think, why am I studying this degree? Like, why? How could I be of use to anyone? This is a student, a young woman that I interviewed who was incredible. And she was so committed to her speech pathology degree. She really wanted to make a difference. And she was so full of enthusiasm and, intelligence. And then suddenly, in her interview account, she goes into this particular sense of feeling of unworthiness. The after effects of abuse lowered my self-confidence and esteem so that I felt I did not deserve a better life. My ex said I was too stupid and too dumb to go to uni. I believed him for a long time. You can't get over the feeling that you're not worthy. You don't even deserve to be here. Now, these are all separate accounts from separate students. And as I said, what really came out strongly was the desire to make a difference. So here are some examples of their words around this. Gender-based violence is a really undisclosed part of people's lives that is so unfortunate that can have the biggest impact, the greatest impact that somebody could ever imagine. And there'd be so many women out there that will be suffering in silence, and trying to figure out a strategy and services that can assist these women is paramount. Another student says, change needs to happen. I really want to be part of that, of making that happen. And a lot of the students talked about wanting to participate in this project because there was no space for them to come together and feel that they could be advocates for change. Education itself provides the freedom, focus, and escape to a better future for women and children. It's not rocket science. Opportunity to thrive leads to contributing citizens. The hidden women numbers are huge. So the students, one of the things that came out of the research that we hadn't expected is this incredible, comprehensive set of student recommendations. I don't have them all here because there's over 30 of them. And we are also working on a digital hub, which will be launched later this year. And I might ask Open Education to circulate that so that you have access to it. And it will have a whole range of open access resources. But this will include the students' own recommendations for policy change and to university leaders. But here is a flavor of what they said. Provide quality education training and continuing professional development for staff and students. Understand higher education's role in building capacity and new forms of expertise to address and combat gender-based violence. Institutions must take explicit stance against all forms of injustice, including gender-based violence. Ensure costs of study are covered, safe accommodation is available, and free health care and legal services are available. Attention to the relationship between flexible and responsive time structures and inclusive pedagogical curricular assessment and support frameworks and practices is needed. Avoid punishing students suffering coercive control and restrictions on their mobility. Relational navigation, not their words, but in a translation of what they were saying, is needed to enable student survivors to successfully navigate complex higher education and social service systems and transition processes. So there's just this, sort of wealth of different services available in community and in university, and there are also real gaps as well. But it's very difficult for a student alone to be able to navigate those and to be able to connect, legal, health, counseling, healthcare, applying for adverse circumstances, and so on, without the kind of navigational support that they require. Zero tolerance of stigmatization of victim survivors and reform policies that are unfairly punitive for students experiencing complex inequalities and trauma and that lead to excessive debt, withdrawal, and poor educational profiles. So these are the aims of the Gender Justice Hub. We want to enable gender-based violence victim survivors to access, participate, and thrive in and beyond higher education, ensure that they inform a transformed higher education sector that actively contributes to gender justice and challenging gender-based violence, prepare the next generation of professionals to understand and challenge gender injustice and its manifestation in gender-based violence, help university students and other professional organizations to become change drivers in the fight against gender-based violence, and recognize and leverage the knowledge, insight, and capacity of student victim survivors for societal and institutional transformation. And the Gender Justice Hub has 5 key dimensions. So one is ongoing research with practical intent. Another is to enable victim survivors to access, participate, and thrive in higher education with the support of the Relational Navigator framework. Another is providing safe spaces of belonging and connection through arts-based praxis. And you will have noticed all the beautiful artwork on the slides. This has actually been generated by the students who have participated in our program called Reclaiming My Place. This program is also in the local community for victim survivors, in refuges, and in other spaces to work in non-hierarchical ways with human service agencies to reconnect with their sense of belonging, their sense of self, and their sense of being a learner. And we recontextualize that as well for our students. So they have They've been responsible for generating this absolutely beautiful artwork. We are also embedding particular evaluation methodologies that are aligned with equity and social justice, and engaging with pedagogical and curriculum development to build knowledge and understanding for future professionals. So, higher education can play an incredible role if it enables access to curriculum to build understanding as people go out and become health professionals, doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, lawyers, and so on, people who have huge amounts of influence and power to make a difference to the national plan to end gender-based violence. So, some final reflections, and thank you for listening. So, drawing on my book with Matt Lumb, I have argued for a new imaginary of higher education equity embedded in openness to critical reflection and action, and firmly positioned against colonizing, marketizing, corporatizing, and commercializing forces of neoliberal capitalism that, far from building equitable systems, reproduce the injustices of the interrelated dimensions of maldistribution, misrecognition, and misrepresentation in conversation with other forces of injustice. Neoliberalism works in concert with neocolonialisms, neopatriarchies, and neoconservatisms, for example, and other kind of inequitable global forces such as post-truth populisms and plutocracies in the sustained exploitation of the human and more than human resources, ultimately widening inequalities and contributing to multidimensional planetary crises. I have pointed to the insidious nature of the cycle of injustice, subordination, and exclusion in which higher education is complicit, producing a dynamic of collusion in sustaining and increasing inequality. As a powerful social institution of knowledge formation, deeply entwined with the orientations that shape our present and future directions, higher education is entangled in the complex social relations that, when left unchallenged, contribute to the multiscalar crises of our times, including the deepening of inequalities and societal divisions, instabilities, conflicts, violence, global pandemics, disease and viruses, climate change, and environmental degradation, and the ongoing ignorance of the harm of colonial histories and neo-colonial dispositions. Simultaneously, higher education generates knowledge to address these crises, and so we must resist falling into the trap of any kind of polarizing thinking. With a more holistic responsibility of higher education to challenge multidimensional social injustice in mind, we can reject the decontextualization of higher education from these urgent social concerns and reframe equity in higher education as entangled in the complicated dynamics in which these crises have emerged. The Gender Justice Hub is one case study of many that illuminates how social, economic, cultural, and representational injustices, when ignored, can sabotage our collective efforts to build equity. Challenging ourselves to move towards rigorous, multidimensional frameworks for equity in, through, and beyond higher education enables us to dismantle harmful and insidious deficit imaginaries. When insidious inequities and traumas are ignored, they unravel our institutional and personal efforts, investments, and commitments to equity. We need to urgently open our imagination to higher education rooted in social and ecological justice by fostering a culture of solidarity and compassion. This means being serious about equity, recognizing its deep complexities, thinking carefully about the key messages we communicate, and holding ourselves responsible to communities navigating social, economic, cultural, and representational inequalities. The Gender Justice Hub project illuminates that students have high aspirations to contribute to society, including participating in meaningful paid work that benefits themselves and others. Students and community partners are co-leaders with universities in processes of reframing the purpose of higher education and of contributing valuable knowledge and wisdom from their experience and their expertise. We simply cannot contemplate a higher education system that puts equity at the center without recognizing the value of this important body of knowledge. The narrowing of higher education for job-ready, employable, market-centric, commercialized purposes undermines our capacity to eradicate poverty, reduce inequalities, promote gender equity, and build peace, justice, and strong institutions, key sustainable development goals that center equity and social justice. Hyper-individualism, entrenched as it is in a culture of competitiveness rather than collaboration, compassion, and solidarity, is toxic for us all. Ignoring multidimensional injustices is ultimately damaging for sustainable higher education, closes rather than opens our imaginative capacity while doing harm to our students and to ourselves. If we ignore these social imperatives, we ignore our long-term collective flourishing and well-being, rooted as it is in our inevitable interdependencies, interconnections, and relational being and doing in the world. I would like to end by paying special and heartfelt tribute to the participants, team members, and community sector partners participating in the collaborative UNESCO Chair projects I shared this morning. I want to acknowledge the wisdom and knowledge that they bring to processes of higher education transformation. Importantly, the UNESCO Chair scheme is not conceived of as the work of a lone scholar. Rather, UNESCO understands that transformation can only come through collective action, through cooperation, collaboration, and meaningful parity of participation in the project of change. It is only together that we can transform higher education as an open, participatory, and equitable space that is concerned with our interconnected, interdependent, more than human flourishing. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward very much to further conversations with you and to the panel this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing final keynote that was. And I think while your research participants are really keen to be part of making a change, you are certainly doing that yourself. So thank you so much. That was spine-tingling, and I think it's really a great privilege this afternoon that we will have our keynote speakers back to be on a panel where we can reflect. You can take some time during the day to think about the questions that you would like to ask Penny Jane Burke this afternoon. But now we're going to go and have some refreshments and come back after morning tea. Thank you.